A jaguar slips into black water, vanishes, and comes up with a caiman the length of a man thrashing in its jaws. Looks like a kill. It's actually a transaction, and the entire river is the silent partner. Watch that cat haul 150 pounds of armored reptile up a mudbank and into the trees, and you're watching something the textbooks spent decades getting wrong. Not the violence, the direction. Because the question nobody thought to ask about the Amazon's top predator isn't what it kills, it's what stops moving through the water the moment it's gone. And the unsettling part, the part that should bother you a little, is that scientists are still tracing the wire. They know the river changed. They're still arguing about exactly how a cat reaches all the way down to the fish on a fisherman's line 100 miles downstream. So let's follow the wire ourselves, one connection at a time, because every link in it is stranger than the last. Start with the cat, because you already have it filed wrong. You picture a jaguar and you picture a forest animal, a spotted ambush hunter that happens to live near rivers, the way a leopard lives near a watering hole, drinks there, crosses there, goes back into the trees to do the real work. That mental image is doing you a disservice, because the jaguar is arguably the most aquatic big cat on the planet, and in some stretches of the Amazon, it's functionally a fisherman. In one Brazilian floodplain study, researchers pulled apart what these cats were actually eating, and the numbers don't describe a forest predator at all. Reptiles turned up in more than half the samples, and fish showed up in nearly as many. That overlap isn't a rounding error. It's what happens when one cat is dragging both caiman and catfish out of the same stretch of water. Camera traps caught them in the act, hauling out thorny catfish, pacu, red-bellied piranha, tiger catfish longer than your arm. They dive. They'll go fully under into murk where you can't see your own hand and come back up with something still kicking. So when you remove a jaguar from a river, you're not subtracting a forest animal that wandered too close to the bank. You're pulling a genuine aquatic predator out of the water itself. And that distinction is where the whole story starts to bend. Here's the first thing that bends. Jaguars are supposed to be loners, fiercely territorial, spaced out across the map, each one defending a patch and tolerating no rivals. That's the rule for the species, written into every field guide. Except in the richest floodplains, the rule breaks. A 2022 study carried a title that reads, "Less like science and more like a confession." Extensive aquatic subsidies lead to territorial breakdown and high density of an apex predator. Strip the jargon and it means this: when the water is generous enough, packed with caiman and fish, the cats stop enforcing their borders. They pile in, their numbers climb to densities you are not supposed to see in a solitary animal. The river doesn't just feed them, it rewrites their social contract, which means the relationship runs in both directions, and that should make you uneasy. If a fat river can rewrite how a jaguar lives, a thinning river can collapse that arrangement just as fast. Pull out the prey base and you don't lose one cat at a time in some slow, dignified decline. You lose the whole dense, tolerant, high population structure at once. The floor drops out from under it. But none of that is the real hinge. The real hinge is an animal most people would never put at the center of anything. It's the caiman. The same alligator cousin you just watched get dragged up the bank. For more than 50 years, there's been a quiet, stubborn hypothesis floating around Amazonian ecology, first put on paper in the early 1970s by a researcher named Fitkow, and it goes like this. The caimans are the nutrient regulators of the river. Amazon water is famously, almost absurdly poor in nutrients. A lot of it runs nearly as clean and barren as distilled water, which is a deranged thing to be able to say about the most biodiverse river on the planet. The caimans in this picture are the fertilizer. Their waste, their leftovers, the sheer mass of them concentrated in lakes and side channels seeds the bottom of the food web. The microscopic life feeds on it. The fish feed on that. It was framed carefully as a hypothesis. Then came the observation that nudged it past pure theory. Where caimans were heavily hunted out for the skin trade, researchers reported fish numbers sliding too. Its correlation, not a sealed case, the exact mechanism is still argued over, but the pattern was hard to unsee. The fertilizer left, and everything above it seemed to get thinner. Now set the cat back on top. Jaguars are one of the very few animals that can take an adult caiman at all. Not the only thing holding those populations in check, but a real one. So follow the chain link by link. The jaguar leans on the caiman may hold up the nutrients feed the fish, and the fish land on a plate in a riverside town 100 miles away. The apex predator is 2 full steps removed from the dinner of people who have never laid eyes on one. That's the loop. Hold on to it, because we're not done loading it. The jaguar doesn't only hunt adult caiman, it hunts them before they hatch. On the Amazon floodplain, the raiders of black caiman nests run from tegu lizards and monkeys to birds, humans, and, now and then, a jaguar. A black caiman lays up to 60 eggs in a single clutch. A jaguar that does find that nest doesn't trim a population. It erases a generation in one night. That's a completely different kind of control valve. Not picking off individuals, but reaching into next year's recruitment and shutting it off at the source. 1 cat, 1 nest, 60 futures. Gone before dawn. And it isn't only caiman nests. The cats work the river turtles too, ambushing them on the sandbanks where they haul out to lay. The one stretch of the year when these armored animals are slow, exposed, and stacked in the open. They're casual enough about it that a single camera study caught a young jaguar just strolling through frame with a mud turtle held in its jaws like a to-go box. That matters more than it looks, because river turtles graze aquatic plants, and their eggs feed an entire guild of smaller hunters. Lean on the turtles at the sandbank, and you've nudged the plant balance of the water and the survival odds of everything that raids those nests. Another wire running off in another direction. So picture the inverse. Picture pulling the jaguar out and letting every one of those control valves swing wide open at once. The system doesn't get simpler, it reshuffles. The animals that spent their lives under the jaguar's pressure get released all at once. Capybaras spreading along the banks, caimans creeping back up in number, the whole balance tilting into something messier rather than emptier. And these aren't abstract winners. The capybaras are the ones that pour into croplands and graze them to stubble. A predator disappears from a place most people will never visit, and part of the bill arrives as flattened farmland miles from where the cat used to patrol. The boom doesn't stay in the river. It walks up onto the land looking for something to eat. And here's where it gets genuinely strange, because the jaguar reshapes the riverbank without laying a claw on anything. It does it with fear. There's a concept in ecology called the landscape of fear, and the cleanest live experiment for it right now is the Ibarra wetlands in Argentina, where jaguars went regionally extinct, gone, erased, 0 left, and are now being deliberately put back. The logic written into that project is precise. With jaguars in the system, capybaras can't sprawl out and graze wherever they please. They get pushed down toward the water where they're less exposed, and they stop chewing the open grassland down to dirt. The grass comes back, not because the cat killed the capybaras eating it, because the cat was simply present and the capybaras did the math. Sit with that one. The mere presence of a predator, the threat of it, never carried out, sculpts the vegetation along a river. Take the threat away and the plants change, the bank changes, the whole shoreline rewrites itself. A cat that hasn't touched a single blade of grass is landscaping by intimidation. And those capybaras, it's intimidating. They aren't just lawnmowers, they're pumps. A capybara feeds on land and relieves itself in and around the water, dragging nutrients out of the dry pasture and dumping them into the river day after day, while it crops the grass into tidy grazing lawns. In the Pantanal, capybaras can climb to something like a quarter of the jaguar's diet, depending on where and how you measure. Which means the cat isn't only deciding how many capybaras exist, It's setting the rate at which land nutrients get pumped into the water. Adjust the predator pressure and you're turning a throttle on the river's chemistry. A throttle no sane person would think to hand to a cat. By now, the obvious question is why? Why is this one cat wired so deep into a river, into the reptiles, the fish, the nutrients, the vegetation, when its cousins, the lions and the tigers, are dryland hunters that mostly want nothing to do with the stuff? The answer is buried in deep time, and it's a little haunting. After the last ice age, the Americas lost their giant land mammals, the oversized ground sloths, the strange armored grazers, the megafauna a big cat would naturally have hunted. That buffet closed, and the jaguar, instead of going down with it, turned to the water. It became a reptile specialist. That absurd bite, pound for pound among the most powerful of any big cat, the one that drives straight through skulls and shells instead of clamping the throat the way every other cat does. That's not a flourish. That's a tool machined for cracking caiman armor and turtle shell. The river food web isn't a sideline for this animal. It's the fallback that became its identity. The jaguar didn't wander down to the river. The river was what was left, and the cat rebuilt itself around it. Which brings us back to the bank. Back to the cat dragging the caiman up out of the black water and into the trees where this started. Because that drag, the thing that looks like a predator just relocating its lunch, is the hidden mechanism this whole story has been walking toward. When a jaguar pulls a caiman, a capybara, a heavy catfish out of the water and hauls it onto land to feed, it is physically carrying the river uphill. Everything locked in that carcass, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the nutrients the water spent years assembling, gets unloaded into the forest soil. Panthera describes it almost frame by frame, the cat surfacing with the caiman flailing, its legs and jaw driving the reptile off the bank and deep into the thickets on the shore. Every one of those kills is a parcel of river deposited into the trees. A nutrient hotspot blooms wherever the cat sits down to eat. You already know this story running the other way. Salmon swim upstream, bears haul them into the forest, and an entire woodland gets fertilized by the ocean. It's one of the most famous nutrient cycles in nature. The jaguar is the Amazon's quieter, smaller-scale version of that bear, working a reverse current almost nobody talks about, moving the water's wealth onto the land one body at a time. Pull the cat out, and you quietly switch that pump off. The river stops being carried into the forest. Now run every wire we've followed back to its source at the same time, because that's the part that should leave you a little off balance. The jaguar leans on the caiman, and the caiman may be propping up the nutrients that feed the fish. The jaguar raids the caiman nests, choking off next year's reptiles before they hatch. It works the turtles on the sandbanks, tilting the plant balance of the water. It governs the capybaras, which set the rate nutrients bleed into the river, and it bends the shoreline's vegetation with nothing but the threat of itself. And it personally ferries the water's nutrients up into the forest with every kill it drags ashore. Take that animal out, and across the Amazon, patch after patch, it has been taken out. And you don't just lose a beautiful cat off a thumbnail. You lose the thing perched on top of the caiman, which sits on top of the nutrients, which sit underneath the fish. The cold version of Fitcow's 50-year-old hunch is already on the record. Strip the reptiles out of a stretch of water and the fish thin out behind them. The river you'd be standing beside would still look like a river. Same dark color, same slow current, same heat coming up off the surface. It would just be quietly running on less. Fewer fish, thinner soil, a bank grazed flat. And you'd never once connect any of it to a spotted cat you never saw. 2 steps up a chain you didn't know your dinner was hanging from.